She left her father-in-law with just $312 and called him a loser with nothing to be proud of. 15 years later, the same man stood before hundreds of people, while the truth about the woman who betrayed him finally came to light. But what happened during those 15 years changed everything. Watch until the end to discover how Orson turned $312 into a new life, and why his biggest revenge was not revenge at all. Subscribe now, because sometimes the person everyone underestimates has the strongest story to tell. My name is Orson Bellwether, and I was 64 years old when my son's wife told me I was a loser. Not privately. Not in anger after an argument. She said it calmly, in front of my own son, while I sat at their dining table with a cup of coffee in my hand. The woman was Vesper Knoxley, a successful businesswoman who measured people by their bank accounts, their connections, and the things they could offer her. She wore an expensive watch that evening and spoke as if every sentence were a business decision. My son, Kalen, sat beside her. He had barely spoken for 20 minutes. I had driven 3 hours to their house in Red Haven because Kalen had told me there was something important we needed to discuss. I thought he wanted advice. I was wrong. Vespera pushed a black folder across the table. Sign these papers, Orson. I opened the folder. The first page stated that I would transfer ownership of my workshop, my inventions, and every design related to my water purification system to her company. I looked at Kalen. You knew about this? His eyes moved toward the window. Dad, just listen to her. I am listening. Vespera folded her hands. You've spent years working on that little machine of yours. We can turn it into a real business. I almost laughed. A real business? Yes. My filter costs less than $20 to build. And that's exactly why you don't understand business. She tapped the papers. My company has investors. We have engineers. We have distribution networks. You have an old workshop and a truck that barely starts. I closed the folder. I'm not signing. Her expression changed. For the first time that evening, she looked genuinely irritated. Orson, don't make this difficult. It belongs to me. She leaned back in her chair. What has it ever given you? I said nothing. She continued. You spent 38 years repairing water systems for the city. You never became wealthy. You never built a company. You never even bothered to make yourself important. Kalen finally spoke. Vespera, that's enough. She turned toward him. No. Someone has to tell him the truth. Then she looked directly at me. A loser with nothing to be proud of. The room went silent. I looked at my son. He didn't defend me. That hurt more than her insult. I had raised Kalen alone after his mother died. I had worked overtime to pay for his college. I had skipped vacations, delayed repairs on my house, and spent weekends fixing other people's problems because I wanted my son to have opportunities one never had. And now he couldn't even look at me. I stood up. Vesper smiled as if she had won. You're really walking away? Yes. You'll regret it. I picked up my old leather jacket. No, Vespera. I think I already regret staying this long. I left without signing anything. Outside, the evening air was cold. I sat inside my battered pickup and checked my bank account. $312.47. That was everything I had available. My house was worth something, but I couldn't sell it immediately. My pension wouldn't arrive for another week. My workshop was tied up in the dispute Vespera had just created. For the first time in my life, I had no idea what I was going to do next. I started the truck. It coughed twice before the engine finally turned over. I drove away from my son's house with $312 in my pocket and one metal case, sitting on the passenger seat. Inside that case was the first working version of my water filter. I had built it 15 years earlier. At the time, I thought it was only a useful invention. I had no idea that the same machine would eventually expose a secret that could destroy everything Vespera had built. But that night, I knew none of that. I only knew one thing. I had been rejected by my own family. And I had $312.47 left to start over. The next morning, I drove north without a plan. I left Red Haven before sunrise, carrying one suitcase, a toolbox, and the metal case containing my water filter. I had slept for less than 3 hours, but I knew I couldn't stay in my house. Every room reminded me of Kaylin. By 9 in the morning, I reached Millhaven. Millhaven was an old industrial town with empty factories, closed stores, and more abandoned buildings than successful businesses. Years earlier, a steel plant had employed half the town. Now, most of the factory gates were covered with rust. I had no reason to be there except one. Nobody wanted the place. A local realtor named Derek then showed me an abandoned railway maintenance building near the edge of town. The roof leaked in 3 places. Several windows were broken. The electrical system worked only in one section of the building. "You really want this place?" Derek asked. "I do." He looked at me for several seconds. "Most people want something cleaner." "I'm not most people." The monthly rent was cheap enough for me to afford. I paid him $180. That left me with $132.47. I carried my suitcase inside and stood alone in the middle of the empty building. For the first time in my adult life, nobody was telling me what I should do. It should have felt frightening. Instead, it felt strangely peaceful. I spent the next week cleaning. I removed broken glass, repaired one window, fixed the electrical outlet near the workbench, and patched the worst hole in the roof. I slept on an old folding cot. My meals were simple: bread, canned soup, eggs, coffee. I had never lived so cheaply, but I also had never been so focused. I opened the metal case. My original filter was still there. I placed it on the workbench. The design was simple. It used a layered filtration system combined with a pressure chamber that could operate without electricity. The problem was that it wasn't perfect. After extended use, the filtration membrane clogged. I had tried to solve that problem years earlier. Then life had interrupted me. My job, my bills, Kaylin, everything. Now I had nothing else to distract me. So I started again. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. I tested different materials and pressure levels. I recorded every result in a notebook. Some experiments failed immediately. Others worked for several hours before breaking down. Then one cold morning in February, I made a discovery. I changed the angle of the intake chamber by less than 2 degrees. The water moved differently through the membrane. The clogging problem disappeared. I tested the system again. Then again. It worked. I sat on the stool and stared at the machine. I didn't celebrate. I simply wrote the result in my notebook. That was when someone knocked on the workshop door. I opened it and saw a woman standing outside. She carried 2 plastic water bottles. Her name was Ilora Penn. She was 32 years old and worked with emergency shelters across several counties. She didn't introduce herself politely. She walked straight to my workbench and placed the bottles in front of me. "Can your machine clean this?" I examined the water. "Where did you get it?" "A flooded basement in Port Mason." I tested it. The contamination level was high. My hands moved automatically as I prepared the filter. 20 minutes later, I checked the results. The water was safe enough for emergency use. Ilora stared at the testing strip. "How much does one of these cost?" "About $18 in materials." She looked at me. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Then why isn't everyone using it?" I smiled. "Because nobody important knows it exists." She didn't smile back. "Maybe they should." 3 days later, she returned. This time she didn't bring 2 bottles. She brought a list. 50 names. Then she added another page. 200 more. A flood had damaged several communities near Port Mason, and emergency crews needed inexpensive purification systems. I looked at the list. "I can't build 200 units." Ilora pulled up a chair. "Can you build one?" "Yes." "Then we build the second one after that." She stayed. So did I. For the next 72 hours, my abandoned railway workshop became a production line. Ilora recruited volunteers. A retired mechanic named Harlan fixed the metal frames. 2 high school students assembled the pressure chambers. A hardware store owner donated tubing. By the 3rd day, we had built 214 working filters. They were loaded into trucks and sent to the flooded communities. I thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't. 6 months later, an envelope arrived at my workshop. The return address made my stomach tighten. Noxley Strategic Ventures. Vespera had found me, and judging from the documents inside, she hadn't come to apologize. She had come to claim my invention. I read Vespera's letter 3 times before I understood what she was claiming. According to Noxley Strategic Ventures, my water purification system belonged to their company. They claimed Vespera had financed my research years earlier and that I had voluntarily transferred my intellectual property to her. I almost laughed. Then I saw the contract. My name was printed at the bottom. Below, it was a signature that looked exactly like mine. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The workshop suddenly felt smaller. I knew I had never signed that agreement, but anyone looking at the document would think otherwise. I called the attorney whose number appeared on the letter. His name was Calder Rusk. He told me to meet him at his office in Port Mason. The following morning, I drove there with every notebook I owned. Calder examined the contract without saying much. Finally, he looked up. "Do you recognize this document?" "No." "Do you recognize the signature?" "Yes." "That makes things complicated. I didn't sign it. I believe you. But belief isn't evidence." He pointed at the contract. "We need to prove when this document was created and where the signature came from." I showed him my engineering notebooks. Each page contained dates, test results, sketches, and notes about my experiments. One entry caught his attention. He stopped turning the pages. "This date." "What about it?" "Your design here is substantially similar to the design described in their patent application." I leaned forward. "What date is that?" "March 17th, 2024. I stared at him. "That can't be." "Why?" "Because their company claims they developed the system in 2026. Calder looked at me. "That may be the problem." For the next several days, we searched through every record I had. Old photographs, workshop receipts, purchase orders, letters from the municipal water department, even photographs from local science fairs. Nothing seemed important at first. Then Illyra called me. "Orson, come to the library." "Why?" "I found something." I drove to the Red Haven Public Library that afternoon. Illyra was waiting beside a computer. She had opened an old newspaper archive. "Look." On the screen was an article from 15 years earlier. The headline read, "Local engineer tests low-cost water filter." The photograph underneath showed me standing beside my original prototype. The publication date was clearly visible. It was 2 years before Vespera claimed she had financed the invention. I sat down. "How did you find this?" "The library digitized old newspapers last month." Illyra clicked another page. There was a second article, then a third. All of them mentioned my invention. All of them were dated years before Vespera's company existed. But there was something else in the second photograph. A woman stood behind the crowd. Vespera. She was younger, but there was no mistake. I stared at her face. I remembered that day. She had attended the demonstration with Kaelin. At the time, I thought she was simply curious. Illyra zoomed in on the photograph. Vespera was holding one of my notebooks. My stomach tightened. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew before she ever married your son." I returned to Millhaven that evening. I spread every document across my workbench. The more I examined them, the more questions appeared. Why had Vespera waited so many years? Why steal an invention that had already been publicly associated with me? And why had she suddenly become desperate to claim it now? The answer came 2 days later. Calder called me. "Orson, I found something." "What?" "Vespera's company is bidding for a major emergency water contract." "How major?" "Large enough to keep her company alive." I sat down. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything." Calder explained that the contract required a purification system capable of operating without electricity. Vespera's company had submitted a prototype, but according to the testing reports, their system failed. Mine didn't. Suddenly, the entire situation made sense. Vespera wasn't trying to humiliate me anymore. She needed me. She needed my invention. She needed the one thing she had mocked as a worthless hobby. But there was another problem. Her contract contained my signature, and unless I could prove it was forged, she could still take everything. That night, I called Kaelin. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. On the fourth attempt, he finally picked up. His voice sounded different. Tired. Almost frightened. Dad, did you know Vespera was claiming my invention? Silence. Kaylin, answer me. I saw the documents. Did you know she was using my work? Another long silence followed. Then he whispered, Dad, there's something I need to tell you. My hand tightened around the phone. What? I think Vespera forged your signature. I closed my eyes. You think? No. His voice cracked. I know. And then he told me something that changed everything. ID equals 74163. Kaylin told me to meet him at a small diner outside Port Mason. He refused to come to my workshop. I don't want Vespera to know I'm talking to you, he said. I arrived just after 6 in the evening. The diner was nearly empty. Kaylin sat in the back corner with his hood pulled over his head. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically. Something about his expression had changed. I sat across from him. Tell me everything. He placed a small flash drive on the table. This is the truth. I didn't touch it. What is on it? Emails. Contracts. Messages. Everything I could save. Why did you wait 15 years? He looked down. Because I was afraid. Of her? Yes. I wanted to be angry, but I already knew the answer. Kaylin explained what had happened after I left their house. Vespera had entered my old workshop and taken several notebooks containing my research. She had also removed my original prototype. She told Kaylin that she was going to turn my invention into a major business. At first, he believed she would eventually return everything. Then he discovered the truth. She had hired engineers to reproduce the filter. They could copy the basic structure, but they couldn't make it work reliably. The membrane kept clogging. The system failed after prolonged use. Vespera became obsessed with finding the missing detail. That detail was in my handwritten notes. You knew she had my prototype? I asked. Kaylin nodded. Yes. You knew she had my notebooks? Yes. And you said nothing? His eyes filled with tears. I was ashamed. That doesn't answer my question. I thought I could fix it. How? I thought I could convince her to stop. I stared at him. And did you? No. He explained that Vespera had threatened him whenever he questioned her. She controlled their finances. She threatened to destroy his career. She even threatened to accuse him of stealing company money. For years, Kaylin stayed silent. Then, 2 months earlier, he found something in Vespera's private office. A folder containing the original contract. It wasn't the document she had shown me. It was an earlier version. And the signature page was blank. My signature had been added later. Kaylin photographed it before Vespera discovered what he had done. That photograph was on the flash drive. I finally picked it up. Why give this to me now? Because she's about to submit the government proposal. When? 3 weeks. I looked at him. What happens if she wins? She gets the contract. And my invention becomes hers? She will claim you developed it for her company. I felt something cold settle inside me. For 15 years, I had believed Vespera had simply stolen an idea. Now I understood that she had built an entire plan around erasing my role in it. But Kaylin wasn't finished. There's more. He opened another folder on his laptop. Vespera's engineers copied your design, but they also copied something else. What? My father's old municipal records. I frowned. What do those have to do with the filter? Nothing. He turned the laptop toward me. These records show that one of the companies Vespera invested in falsified water quality reports years ago. I read the documents carefully. The company had certified contaminated water as safe. Families had relied on those reports. Several communities had suffered illnesses afterward. Why would Vespera have these? She bought the company. When? 7 years ago. I looked at him. And the records? She never knew I found them. The pieces began connecting. Her patent claim, the government contract, the stolen design, the falsified reports. This was bigger than my invention. Vespera had spent years creating a company that depended on information nobody was supposed to question. Then Kaylin said the sentence that shocked me most. Dad, I didn't give you everything. I stared at him. What else is there? He reached into his coat and placed a second envelope on the table. I found this behind a loose panel in her office. I opened it. Inside was an old photograph. It showed Vespera standing beside my first prototype 15 years earlier. But that wasn't what made my hands shake. Standing beside her was a man I recognized immediately. Derek Sable, the city inspector who had approved several of Vespera's questionable water contracts. He had also been the person who rejected my original application for funding years ago. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten sentence. Once Orson disappears, the design becomes ours. I read it twice. Then I looked at Kaylin. Who wrote this? I don't know. A waitress suddenly approached our table. Excuse me, she said quietly. Are you Orson Bellwether? I froze. Yes. She handed me a sealed envelope. A man left this for you an hour ago. Who? He wouldn't give me his name. I opened the envelope. There was only one sentence inside. Stop investigating, or your workshop will be next. I looked toward the diner window. A dark vehicle was parked across the street. Its engine was running. Then the headlights turned on, and the vehicle began moving toward us. I watched the dark vehicle pass the diner without stopping. For several seconds, neither Kaylin nor I spoke. Then Kaylin grabbed the flash drive. We need to leave. I nodded. We paid the bill and walked through the back entrance. Instead of driving directly to my workshop, I took Kaylin to a motel outside Millhaven. We checked in under his name. Once inside the room, I placed the photograph and the threatening note on the table. I don't understand one thing, I said. If Vespera already has my design, why is she still afraid of me? Kaylin looked at the photograph. Because she doesn't have everything. What is missing? The manufacturing records. I stared at him. He explained that my original notebooks contained more than engineering notes. They included the precise manufacturing process for the filtration membrane. Without those instructions, Vespera's engineers could copy the appearance of the filter but not reproduce its performance. That was why her company needed me. They didn't want to buy my invention. They wanted to make it look as if they had created it first. The next morning, I contacted Calder Rusk. I told him about the photograph, the threats, and the municipal records. He immediately told us to preserve every piece of evidence. Do not confront Vespera, he warned. I wasn't planning to. Good. Let the documents speak. But there was a problem. The original municipal records were stored in Red Haven's old water department archive. The building was scheduled for demolition in 5 days. If those records disappeared, the evidence connecting Vespera's company to the falsified reports could be lost. Kaylin and I drove back to Red Haven. We arrived at the archive just before closing. A clerk named Marnie Quill met us at the entrance. She was a thin woman with silver hair and a stack of folders under one arm. I know who you are, she said. I expected her to ask questions. Instead, she said, I was wondering when you'd come looking for these. She led us into a storage room. There were hundreds of boxes. Marnie pointed toward a shelf. Box 417. I opened it. Inside were inspection reports from 17 years earlier. I found the exact records Kaylin had mentioned. But then I noticed something strange. Several pages were missing. Someone removed these. Marnie nodded. 3 months ago. Who? I don't know. Did anyone request the files? Yes. Who? She hesitated. Derek Sable. My stomach tightened. The same man from the photograph. Marnie reached beneath the desk and produced another envelope. He requested several boxes. But he returned only some of them. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a laboratory report. It showed that contaminated water had been certified as safe. The signature belonged to Derek Sable. But the laboratory stamp was from a facility that had not opened until 2 years later. The report was fabricated. That discovery changed the case. It proved the records had been manipulated long before Vespera acquired the company. She hadn't created the original fraud. She had inherited it. But she had knowingly continued it. Then Marnie said something unexpected. There is one more thing. She took out a small cassette tape. Your name is on this. I stared at the tape. When was it recorded? 15 years ago. We found an old cassette player in the archive. The recording began with static. Then I heard a voice. Derek Sable. We can't approve Bellwether system. If his device enters the public market, the existing contractors will lose their business. Another voice answered. Vespera. You said you could stop him. I can delay him. And his son. He's young. He won't understand what happened until it's too late. My hands went cold. They had discussed me 15 years earlier. They had planned to keep my invention from receiving public funding. But there was more. Vespera's voice became clearer. Once Orson gives up, we'll acquire the design. The recording ended. I looked at Kalen. He was crying. My mother was involved too, he whispered. I didn't answer. For years, I had believed Vespera had entered my life later and destroyed what I had built. Now I understood that the betrayal had begun much earlier. She had been watching my work before she married my son. And Kalen had unknowingly become part of the plan. We left the archive with certified copies of everything. That evening, Calder filed an emergency injunction against Knoxley Strategic Ventures. The government suspended the contract review. Vespera's company was ordered to preserve its records. For the first time, she could not control the situation. 3 days later, the truth became public. News outlets reported the falsified water certifications. Then they reported the disputed patent claim. Then they published the photograph. Vespera's investors began withdrawing. Her engineers cooperated with investigators. Derek Sable disappeared from his office before police arrived. But Vespera did something nobody expected. She called me personally. I want to meet, she said. No. You don't understand. I have something that can prove your invention belongs to you. I paused. What? A document I kept from everyone. Why would you give it to me? Her voice became quiet. Because if I don't, I go to prison. I ended the call. For the next 2 days, I ignored every message. Then Calder received an unexpected package. Inside was a sealed envelope. It contained the one document Vespera had never shown anyone. It was a handwritten agreement from 15 years earlier. And at the bottom was a name that wasn't mine. It belonged to someone who had been dead for 11 years. The name at the bottom of the document was Elias Knoxley, Vespera's father. He had died 11 years earlier. I stared at the signature for a long time. What is this? I asked Calder. He placed the document under a lamp. It is an assignment agreement. Between who? Elias Knoxley and you. I shook my head. I never met him. That is exactly why this matters. The document stated that Elias had reviewed my water purification design 15 years earlier and had formally acknowledged me as its sole inventor. More importantly, he had written that his daughter had no ownership rights over my invention. There was a handwritten note beneath his signature. Orson Bellwether must retain control of his work. His invention should serve communities, not investors. I couldn't believe it. Vespera's own father had recognized the truth before she ever tried to steal it. But there was another surprise. The document had been witnessed by a notary. Calder checked the notary's records. The signature was genuine. The date was genuine. The agreement was legally valid. Vespera had kept the document hidden for 15 years. She had known all along that her claim was false. That was the evidence we needed. Within days, the court ruled that my invention belonged to me. Knoxley Strategic Ventures lost the government contract. The investigation into the falsified water reports continued. Derek Sable was arrested several weeks later. Vespera's company collapsed soon afterward. I expected to feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. For 15 years, I had imagined what it would be like to see Vespera lose everything. When it finally happened, I discovered that revenge was much less satisfying than I had expected. I returned to Millhaven. The old railway workshop was no longer empty. It had become a small manufacturing center. Illyra managed the operation. Local volunteers assembled filters. Families from nearby towns came to collect them. We had built something real. Something Vespera could never own. Then Kalen came to see me. He stood outside the workshop for several minutes before entering. Dad. I looked up from my workbench. What do you want? To apologize. You already did. No. I apologized because I felt guilty. This time I want to tell you what I understand. I put down my tools. He continued. I thought success meant having money and influence. I believed Vespera because she made everything look impressive. He looked around the workshop. But you built this with almost nothing. I nodded. I had $312. I know. He smiled sadly. And you turned it into something that helped thousands of people. I didn't know what to say. He took a small envelope from his pocket. I found this in my old house. Inside was the receipt from the night I left. The original dinner receipt. At the bottom was my signature. The same signature Vespera had copied. I looked at it and remembered that night. You kept this. I don't know why. I folded it carefully. Maybe you needed to remember where everything changed. He nodded. We didn't hug. Not yet. Forgiveness takes time. But that day, Kaylin stayed and helped me repair a damaged filtration unit. We worked until sunset. Months passed. Then a major flood struck a rural county several states away. Our cooperative sent hundreds of filters. No one asked for payment. A year later, the organization received an international humanitarian grant. The money could have made me wealthy. Instead, I used most of it to establish free water stations in communities that could not afford purification systems. I kept enough to repair my house. For the first time in years, I fixed the porch roof. It stopped leaking. One afternoon, I received an invitation to the opening of the Bellwether Community Water Center in Red Haven. My name was on the building. I almost refused to attend. But I went. Hundreds of people were there. Children from local schools stood beside the filtration systems. Doctors talked about clinics that now had reliable clean water. Families from flood zones told stories about how our machines had helped them. Then Kaylin walked onto the stage. He looked at the audience. My father left my home 15 years ago with $312, he said. He thought he had lost everything. Kaylin looked at me. But he didn't. The crowd became silent. He lost a house filled with people who didn't understand his value. What he gained was the freedom to build something nobody could take from him. I lowered my head. For the first time, I felt no anger toward Vespera. Her insult no longer mattered. Her company no longer mattered. Her opinion no longer mattered. I finally understood that my greatest victory wasn't destroying the person who had called me a loser. It was becoming someone who no longer needed her approval. After the ceremony, I returned home. I opened the drawer beside my bed. Inside was the old bank statement showing my balance of $312.47. I kept it, not because I was ashamed of it, because it reminded me that a person can start again with almost nothing. 15 years earlier, Vespera had asked me what I had to be proud of. Now I knew the answer. I was proud of the people we had helped. I was proud that my son eventually chose the truth. I was proud that I didn't allow betrayal to decide who I became. And I was proud that when I had only $312 left, I kept going. That was enough. More than enough. My name is Orson Bellwether. I was once called a loser with nothing to be proud of. 15 years later, I realized I had never needed to prove her wrong. I only needed to prove that she was wrong about me. If this story touched you, subscribe for more stories about betrayal, resilience, unexpected justice, and second chances. Sometimes the person who walks away with the least is the one who eventually builds the most.